Please don't take my shoes, stepmother. The desperate plea of a little girl echoed through the cold afternoon as tears streamed down her face. The scene caught the attention of a man who had everything money could buy, but at that moment, his wealth meant nothing compared to what he was witnessing. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The first frost bit through Mary Johnson's toes as she stood on the crumbling porch of her stepmother's old house, her tangled curls catching the pale morning light. The wooden boards creaked beneath her small frame, protesting against the weight of another winter. Maplewood Village was still asleep, wrapped in a blanket of early morning mist that hung over the rooftops like forgotten dreams. "Please don't take my shoes, stepmother," she whispered, her voice barely louder than the wind, as Anna Smith yanked the scuffed ballet flats from her feet with a cold, practiced sneer. The woman's fingers were like ice against Mary's skin, methodical in their cruelty. "These are far too good for school," Anna hissed, examining the worn leather with disdain. "You'll ruin them completely. Besides, a little cold builds character." Her stepmother's breath formed small clouds in the frigid air, dissipating like the warmth that had once filled this house before Mary's father had passed. As the heavy door slammed shut, Mary wrapped her arms tighter around her thin, threadbare coat. The fabric, once blue but now faded to an uncertain gray, offered little protection against the morning chill. She didn't cry. Tears would only freeze on her cheeks. Instead, she pressed her cheek to the rough wood, listening for the sound of kindness she never expected to come. The cold seeped upward from the porch boards, numbing her feet until they felt like they belonged to someone else. Mary wiggled her toes, watching them turn pink, then white against the frost-covered wood. She'd walked to school like this, as she had many times before, collecting strange looks from teachers who never quite asked the right questions. But that morning, the silence broke. The purr of an expensive car echoed down the lane, the sound foreign in this part of Maplewood, where vehicles were typically old and complaining. Mary lifted her head, curiosity momentarily overwhelming her discomfort. The black sedan moved slowly, like a sleek animal unsure of its territory. Through the morning mist, she could make out a woman's silhouette behind the wheel, elegant, poised, somehow different from anyone Mary had ever seen in the village. For a brief moment, their eyes met across the distance, and something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, though they'd never met before. Mary's world shifted, subtle as a change in the wind, but just as significant. She didn't know it yet, but the arrival of Jennifer Davis would alter the course of her life forever, beginning with those bare feet on the frozen porch. A sleek black sedan pulled up beside the frostbitten gate, its engine purring softly against the morning silence. Jennifer Davis emerged from the vehicle with practiced grace, her cashmere coat billowing slightly in the winter breeze. There was something undeniably magnetic about her presence, like a warm front cutting through the frozen air of Maplewood. Her designer boots crunched on the gravel as she paused, taking in the dilapidated house beyond the rusted iron bars. That's when she saw her, a small figure huddled against the porch, barefoot despite the frost. Mary Johnson stood motionless, her thin arms wrapped tightly around her threadbare coat. The child's tangled curls caught what little sunlight filtered through the bare trees, creating a halo effect that made Jennifer's breath catch in her throat. "Good morning," Jennifer called out, her voice gentle, yet carrying across the yard. The wealthy woman hesitated, unsure if approaching would frighten the girl away. Something about Mary's posture, resilient yet vulnerable, stirred memories Jennifer had spent years trying to bury. Mary didn't respond, but lifted her gaze to meet Jennifer's. The connection was immediate and electric. In those eyes, Jennifer recognized a familiar pain, the kind that comes from loss too profound for words. Her own grief, still raw despite the passing years, flickered to life as she studied the child's silhouette against the weathered house. Jennifer's heart clenched painfully. She had come to Maplewood seeking solitude, a place to heal away from the sympathetic glances and whispered conversations that followed her in the city. Instead, she found herself unable to look away from this barefoot child shivering in the cold morning air. "Are you all right?" she asked, moving closer to the gate, her manicured fingers wrapping around the cold metal. The contrast between her polished appearance and Mary's obvious neglect couldn't have been more stark. Mary shifted her weight from one frozen foot to the other, glancing nervously at the front door as if expecting someone to emerge at any moment. The fear in that simple movement told Jennifer everything she needed to know. In that instant, something shifted inside her. The wall she had carefully constructed around her heart after her own loss began to crack. Jennifer knew she could no longer pretend not to see what was happening in this village, not when it was playing out right before her eyes. "My name is Jennifer," she said softly, reaching into her handbag. "Would you like to tell me yours?" The question hung in the frosty air between them. A bridge tentatively extended over a chasm neither yet understood. Inside the dimly lit house, Anna Smith fussed with the faded curtains, her jaw set in a hard line as she meticulously adjusted each fold. Her fingers, thin and restless, worked with practiced precision, while her mind raced through a catalog of excuses she would offer the neighbors about Mary's appearance. The barefoot child was becoming a liability to her carefully constructed facade. "The girl refuses to wear shoes," she would tell Mrs. Parker from across the street. "Children these days, so willful, despite my best efforts." Anna rehearsed the sympathetic sighs she would receive, the knowing nods from other adults who would never question her authority. Appearances were everything in Maplewood. The small village thrived on whispers and judgment, and Anna had spent years crafting her image as the selfless stepmother, taking in her dead husband's difficult child. She straightened her blouse and smoothed her hair, studying her reflection in the hallway mirror. The woman staring back looked composed, respectable, everything she needed others to see. She couldn't let Mary's vulnerability, her persistent softness, unravel the narrative she'd woven so carefully. The child's quiet resilience threatened everything Anna had built. Her control over the household, over Mary's very existence, was absolute, or so she believed. From the corner of her eye, Anna spotted Mary by the window and snapped, "Get away from there! The neighbors will see you gawking like some beggar child." Mary Johnson stepped back but didn't retreat completely. Once Anna stormed into the kitchen, she pressed her forehead against the cool glass again, her breath creating small clouds of fog on the window pane. Outside, Jennifer Davis was speaking quietly to the old gardener who tended the neighboring properties. The elegant woman gestured toward the house, her expression concerned as she nodded at whatever the man was saying. Mary watched, transfixed by the gentle way Jennifer touched the gardener's weathered hand, a small gesture of connection that seemed foreign in Mary's world of harsh words and cold silences. She wondered, as she often did while observing life beyond these walls, if the world outside was really as cruel and unforgiving as Anna claimed it to be. Perhaps there were places where kindness wasn't a weakness to be stomped out, places where small mercies bloomed in secret, like the wildflowers Mary sometimes found growing through cracks in the garden path, persistent and beautiful, despite having no right to exist there. The thought warmed her more than any pair of shoes could have. Darkness had settled over Maplewood as Mary Johnson slipped from beneath her thin blanket. The floorboards creaked under her small feet, but Anna Smith's snores continued uninterrupted from down the hall. Mary held her breath anyway, counting to 10 before daring to move again. The moonlight filtering through the window guided her path to the door. Outside, the village slept under a canopy of stars. Mary's bare feet padded silently across the damp grass, each step a familiar ache she'd learned to ignore. The old chapel stood at the edge of the village, its weathered stone walls bathed in silver light. A single candle flickered in the window, the caretaker's signal that he'd finished his evening duties and left the side door unlocked. The heavy wooden door groaned as Mary pushed it open just enough to slip inside. The scent of beeswax candles and ancient hymnals wrapped around her like an embrace. Here, in this sacred space, she could pretend she was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere her mother still lived, where warmth wasn't just a memory. Mary moved to the center of the chapel, where moonlight spilled through the stained glass windows, casting jewel-toned patterns across the worn stone floor. She closed her eyes, remembering her mother's gentle hands guiding her through first positions. "Dance is prayer without words," she used to say. The child began to move, her small body flowing through the steps she'd practiced in secret for years. Without music, she danced to the rhythm of her own heartbeat, each movement a conversation with ghosts. Her arms reached skyward, her toes pointed despite the cold stone beneath them. In these moments, Mary wasn't barefoot because her shoes had been taken. She was barefoot because dancers feel the earth most honestly this way. Unknown to the dancing child, Robert Brown watched from the shadows near the altar. The aging cobbler had come to replace a candle he'd promised the church, his arthritic hands clutching the offering. Instead, he found himself transfixed by the girl's silent ballet. His gnarled fingers, shaped by decades of crafting leather into art, twitched with recognition of another kind of artistry. Robert's eyes, growing cloudier with each passing season, could still discern the grace in her movements. More painfully, he noticed the bruises on her feet, the way she winced when landing from a small leap. His heart ached with a familiar longing to create something meaningful before his skills abandoned him completely. "One last pair," he whispered to himself, so quietly that even the shadows didn't stir. "One last pair worth making." Mary danced on, unaware of her audience, lost in the only freedom she truly possessed, the ability to become weightless, if only for a moment. Jennifer Davis couldn't sleep that night. The image of the barefoot child at the gate haunted her, stirring memories she'd tried desperately to bury. Wrapped in a cashmere robe, she wandered the dimly lit corridors of her rented estate, the floorboards creaking beneath her slippered feet. The moonlight filtered through tall windows, casting elongated shadows across the walls. It was during one of these restless patrols that she noticed something peculiar: faint markings on the hallway wall near the servants' quarters. Jennifer leaned closer, her breath catching in her throat. They were drawings, delicate, ethereal sketches of ballet dancers. Each figure was rendered in soft pencil strokes, hidden in the corners where they might escape notice. Some depicted pirouettes, others arabesques, all executed with surprising skill for what appeared to be a child's hand. The dancers seemed to float across the plaster, their faces tiny ovals of concentration and yearning. "Who could have—" she whispered, fingers hovering over the artwork without touching. Then understanding dawned. The wealthy woman recalled Mary's bruised feet, the way she'd stood with natural poise despite her circumstances. These weren't random doodles. They were dreams etched in graphite. Jennifer traced the outline of one dancer with her fingertip, feeling a connection to the artist that transcended their brief encounter. Each sketch told a story of longing, of a spirit confined yet soaring through imagination. The elegant woman recognized that particular ache. She carried a similar one in her own heart. Carefully, she took out her smartphone and photographed each drawing. Then, making a decision, she retrieved a letter opener from her study and gently worked the edge of her blade around one of the smaller sketches. The plaster crumbled slightly, but the drawing came away intact. "I'm sorry for defacing your walls," she murmured to the empty hallway, "but these deserve to be preserved." In her bedroom, Jennifer opened her leather-bound journal and slipped the rescued artwork between its pages. She studied it under her reading lamp, a tiny ballerina with arms outstretched, reaching for something just beyond grasp. The similarity to Mary's posture that morning was unmistakable. "I need to know more about you," she whispered, closing the journal reverently. Tomorrow, she would speak with Maggie Johnson, her housekeeper. If anyone knew the village's secrets, it would be Maggie. Jennifer settled back against her pillows, her mind racing with questions about the barefoot girl with bruised feet and an artist's soul, a child who could create such beauty while living in the shadow of that cold woman at the gate. Spring arrived in hesitant, chilly bursts across Maplewood. Mary Johnson stood by the weathered fence surrounding her stepmother's property, her small fingers tracing the tiny green buds that promised warmth to come. Each morning, she would count the new spots of color breaking through winter's grip. 3 yellow crocuses yesterday, 5 today. These small victories sustained her through increasingly difficult days. Inside the house, Anna Smith's rules multiplied like shadows at dusk. "You'll attend church every Sunday without exception," she announced over breakfast, not looking up from her teacup. "And I expect the floors scrubbed twice weekly now." The woman's voice carried the sharp edge that Mary had learned meant no discussion would be permitted. The worst change came without warning. Mary discovered her only pair of shoes, the worn ballet flats, locked in a wooden box Anna kept on the highest shelf in her bedroom. "Barefoot children learn respect," her stepmother had said when Mary asked about them. "Besides, you've been sneaking out at night. Don't think I haven't noticed." The cold earth beneath Mary's feet had become familiar, almost comforting in its consistency. She'd learned to walk on the balls of her feet when frost covered the ground, to find patches of morning sun where the earth warmed faster. It was during one such dawn exploration that Jennifer Davis appeared on the other side of the garden wall. The elegant woman wore a light jacket against the spring chill, her presence unexpected, but somehow not surprising. "Good morning," Jennifer called softly, careful not to draw attention from the main house. "I thought I might find you here." Mary nodded, her tangled curls catching the early light. She remained cautious, but didn't run away. Jennifer reached into her pocket and withdrew something soft and flowing, a silk scarf in shades of blue and violet that seemed to capture the colors of twilight. "I noticed you like to dance," she said, her voice gentle as she extended the gift across the wall. Mary hesitated before accepting it, the fabric impossibly smooth against her calloused fingers. "For a dancer," Jennifer added with a small smile. "Every dancer needs something that moves with them." As Jennifer wrapped the scarf around Mary's thin shoulders, their eyes met. Something unspoken passed between them, recognition, perhaps, or understanding. The wealthy woman's fingers lingered briefly, adjusting the fabric with care that Mary hadn't felt in years. "Thank you," Mary whispered, the words barely audible over the morning breeze. Jennifer nodded, her eyes bright with emotion she couldn't quite hide. "Tomorrow?" she asked simply. Mary glanced back at the house, then nodded once before disappearing among the budding trees, the scarf trailing behind her like a promise. In the heart of Maplewood, rumors spread like morning frost across window panes. Anna Smith stood at the center of the village market, her voice low but deliberate, as she leaned toward Mrs. Patterson, the postmaster's wife. "Mary simply cannot follow the simplest rules," Anna confided, adjusting her scarf with practiced concern. "Just yesterday, I found her drawings all over the walls, perfectly good wallpaper ruined. And the things she imagines, always dancing, always wanting things far beyond our means." The village's old guard nodded sympathetically. They understood the difficulties of raising a child, particularly one not your own. Anna's complaints found fertile ground among those who valued order and tradition above all else. "She sneaks out at night," Anna continued, her voice trembling with manufactured worry. "I fear what might become of her if this rebellious streak isn't controlled." 3 shops down, Maggie Johnson pretended to examine apples while listening intently. The housekeeper's fingers tightened around the basket handle as Anna's lies multiplied. She'd known Mary's mother since they were children themselves, running through these same streets with muddy shoes and wild laughter. Later that afternoon, while polishing the antique mirror in Jennifer's study, Maggie noticed a collection of small drawings carefully arranged on the desk. Her hand froze mid-motion. The delicate lines, the distinctive way the figures seemed to float above the paper. She recognized the style immediately. "These drawings," Maggie whispered when Jennifer entered. "They're just like Sarah's." Jennifer set down her cup. "Sarah? Mary's mother, my childhood friend." Maggie's weathered fingers hovered over the sketches. "She drew like this, always dancers, always reaching for something just beyond the page." Jennifer moved closer, studying Maggie's face. "You knew her well?" "We were inseparable until she married Mary's father. Then Anna came after he died, and—" Maggie's voice hardened. "Things changed. The whole village just watched it happen." Outside, rain began to fall, drumming against the windows of the estate. In the village square, Anna hurried home, clutching her purchases close to her chest. She felt the tide turning against her, sensed the questions forming in neighbors' minds after years of unquestioning support. At home, Mary sat quietly by her window, watching droplets race down the glass. She drew invisible dancers with her fingertip, unaware that her small acts of creation had connected 3 women across time: her mother, her protector, and the housekeeper who remembered everything the village had chosen to forget. The storm descended on Maplewood with little warning, transforming the gentle stream that wound through the village into a churning, angry river. Within hours, the main road was submerged, cutting off access to neighboring towns. Villagers rushed to secure their homes and belongings as rain lashed against windows and thunder rolled across the darkening sky. Mary Johnson stood at the edge of her stepmother's property, watching as Anna Smith barked orders at neighbors who'd gathered to reinforce the garden wall with sandbags. The girl had been forgotten in the chaos, a blessing in disguise. With everyone distracted, she could move freely for once. That's when she heard it. A frightened, desperate mewling coming from near the footbridge. No one else seemed to notice the sound beneath the storm's roar. Mary glanced back at the house, then slipped away, her bare feet finding purchase on the muddy path. The kitten was trapped on a fallen branch that had wedged against the bridge's supports. The tiny creature, soaked and trembling, clung desperately as water rushed around it. Without hesitation, Mary waded into the frigid current. The water bit at her ankles, then her knees, but she pressed forward, her thin frame braced against the force of the stream. "I've got you," she whispered, stretching her arms toward the frightened animal. The branch shifted, and Mary lunged forward, nearly losing her balance. Her fingers closed around the kitten's wet fur just as the wood gave way, disappearing downstream. From the window of Jennifer Davis's estate, Maggie Johnson lowered her binoculars, her heart in her throat. She'd been checking for damage to the property when she spotted the small figure in the water. The housekeeper watched as Mary cradled the rescued kitten to her chest, trudging back to shore with determination that belied her size. By evening, the rain had stopped. Villagers gathered in the town square to assess the damage and distribute supplies. Anna pushed through the crowd, complaining loudly about a broken fence panel when someone pointed to a trail of small, muddy footprints leading away from the meeting. Several curious neighbors followed the tracks to a sheltered alcove behind the church. There sat Mary, cross-legged on the ground, feeding tiny pieces of bread to a now dry kitten. The girl looked up, startled at the sudden audience. No one spoke at first. Robert Brown, leaning heavily on his walking stick, was the first to approach. The cobbler knelt slowly, his arthritic joints protesting, and gently stroked the kitten's head. "Brave little thing," he said, though it wasn't clear whether he meant the animal or its rescuer. The villagers exchanged glances. They'd heard Anna's stories about her troublesome stepdaughter for years, but the child before them, who'd risked herself to save something small and helpless, didn't match those tales at all. The crisp dawn air carried whispers of possibility as Jennifer Davis knelt beside Mary, demonstrating the proper position of arms in first position. These stolen moments had become sacred to them both, brief interludes of grace before Anna would wake and demand Mary's return to household chores. "My daughter used to dance just like you," Jennifer confessed one morning, her voice catching slightly. She had the same determination in her eyes. She guided Mary's small hands into the correct form, each gentle correction healing something broken within herself. Mary absorbed every movement like parched earth drinks rain. For her, these lessons were more than dance. They were freedom, connection, and a glimpse into a world where her spirit could soar beyond the confines of her stepmother's house. The child practiced relentlessly, even when alone in her room, feet tracing patterns on worn floorboards. "You have a natural talent," Jennifer told her, watching Mary execute a perfect plie. "Your mother would be so proud." The words hung between them, delicate and precious. Mary didn't cry, but her eyes shimmered with something that looked remarkably like hope. As May surrendered to June, wildflowers erupted along the village paths, and Mary's confidence blossomed alongside them. She walked taller now, even barefoot, carrying herself with newfound dignity that didn't go unnoticed. Maggie often watched from the kitchen window of Jennifer's estate, her heart swelling with pride for her friend's daughter. But within the walls of the old house, Anna Smith's resentment festered like a wound. She noticed the changes in her stepdaughter, the secret smiles, the humming under her breath, the way she sometimes moved as if music played in her head. Each sign of joy seemed to deepen Anna's bitterness. "You've been sneaking off again," she accused one evening, fingers tightening around Mary's thin wrist. "Who's filling your head with nonsense?" Mary remained silent, eyes downcast, but something in her posture, a steadiness that hadn't been there before, enraged her stepmother further. When posters for the spring fair appeared throughout Maplewood, featuring traditional dances and community celebrations, Anna made her decision. The morning of the fair dawned bright and clear, but Mary found herself locked in the attic, a space that smelled of dust and forgotten dreams. "Perhaps this will teach you where you belong," Anna hissed through the door. Left alone with nothing but a cracked teacup of water and the distant sounds of celebration, Mary closed her eyes and began to dance. In her mind, she was performing at the fair, Jennifer watching proudly from the crowd. Each step, each turn was an act of quiet rebellion, a promise that someday she would dance where everyone could see. Robert Brown hunched over his workbench, his weathered hands moving with practiced precision despite the late hour. The small workshop glowed with warm lamplight, filled with the rich scent of polished leather and the distinctive lavender polish he'd made from his grandmother's recipe. Tiny hammers, awls, and specialized tools lined the walls, silent witnesses to 50 years of craftsmanship. "These must be perfect," he whispered to himself, carefully stretching the supple leather over the last. Jennifer Davis had commissioned these shoes 3 weeks ago, paying triple his usual rate and requesting his finest materials. The elegant woman had been specific about every detail, delicate yet resilient, beautiful yet practical, but curiously silent about who would wear them. "Something worthy of someone who's known both sorrow and hope," she'd said, her eyes distant with emotion. Robert understood that look. He'd seen it in his mirror after losing his wife. The cobbler worked meticulously, infusing each stitch with the care that had made him legendary in Maplewood. His fingers, though increasingly stiff with age, remembered every technique his father had taught him. The shoes were taking shape, not flashy like the designer brands from the city, but something more honest, more lasting. Every Thursday afternoon, Mary Johnson appeared at his back door like clockwork. The child never mentioned her stepmother, but Robert noticed how she always glanced over her shoulder before entering. Today, she swept the wood shavings from this floor with careful attention, pausing occasionally to study his work. "Are those for a princess?" she asked, her voice soft with wonder. Robert smiled, setting down his tools. "Perhaps, or maybe for someone who deserves to feel like one." Mary moved closer, her bare feet silent on the worn floorboards. The cobbler's heart ached at the sight of her calloused soles. "I once made shoes for a ballerina in Paris," he told her, beginning the stories she loved, "and boots for a mountain climber who conquered peaks no one had ever reached before." As twilight painted the workshop windows purple, Robert showed Mary how he carved tiny stars into the leather soles, his signature that most would never see. "My father taught me that shoes aren't just for walking," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The right pair can carry wishes with every step, if you believe strongly enough." Mary's eyes widened. "Any wish at all? The ones that matter most," Robert answered, watching how she traced the outline of the unfinished shoes with reverent fingers. "The ones that come from here." He tapped his chest gently. As she left that evening, the cobbler watched her disappear down the lane, determination settling in his bones. These shoes would be his masterpiece, even if his failing eyesight made each stitch a battle against time. The crisp autumn air carried whispers of the upcoming harvest festival through Maplewood, but inside Mary Johnson's home, the atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive. Anna Smith paced through the small living room, her eyes darting to the clock as she sorted through a pile of Mary's possessions. "These old things are just taking up space," Anna announced, stuffing a worn teddy bear and several books into a donation box. Mary stood silently in the doorway, watching as her stepmother methodically stripped away the few treasures she possessed. The woman had already sold her music box last week, claiming the money would go to the church fund. Mary knew better. "Mrs. Peterson asked about your behavior at school," Anna continued, her voice laced with artificial concern. "I told her we're doing everything we can with such a difficult child." The lie hung in the air like poison. Mary hadn't misbehaved. She'd simply asked her teacher about ballet lessons. That evening, Anna paraded through the village square, donation box in hand, receiving sympathetic nods from neighbors as she spun tales of Mary's supposed defiance. "Such a burden," she sighed dramatically to Mrs. Wilson outside the grocery store. "Taking in my husband's daughter was an act of charity, but her ingratitude tests even my patience." Only Maggie Johnson, passing by on her way to Jennifer's estate, recognized the performance for what it was. The housekeeper's eyes narrowed as she watched Anna pocket the cash from selling a hand-knit scarf that had belonged to Mary's mother. Maggie's heart ached, knowing the child treasured anything connected to her past. Later that night, while Anna entertained the pastor downstairs, Mary crept into the dusty attic seeking solace. The floorboards creaked beneath her feet as she navigated between forgotten furniture and boxes. In the corner, illuminated by moonlight streaming through a small window, sat a battered shoebox she'd never noticed before. Curious, Mary lifted the lid. Inside lay dozens of letters, their envelopes yellowed with age, but addressed in elegant handwriting she somehow recognized. With trembling fingers, she opened one. "My dearest Thomas," it began. Mary's breath caught, her father's name. "I cannot express how much our time together meant to me. When you spoke of your daughter, I felt as though I already loved her." The letter was signed, "Forever yours, Jennifer." Mary quickly opened another, then another. Each page revealed a connection between her father and Jennifer Davis that Anna had deliberately hidden away. Dates, promises, plans for a future together, all intercepted and buried before they could change the course of Mary's life. A floorboard creaked behind her. Mary hastily gathered the letters, tucking them inside her sweater. These weren't just paper and ink. They were a different version of her story, one where love hadn't been stolen from her, one where perhaps it still waited. The morning mist clung to the village as Jennifer Davis and Mary Johnson walked along the stone path that bordered the estate's gardens. These early walks had become their ritual, a sacred time when words weren't always necessary. Jennifer's elegant stride matched the child's smaller steps, their shadows merging in the golden dawn light. I used to dance with my mother here, Mary whispered, pointing to a clearing beneath an old oak tree, before she got sick. Jennifer squeezed the girl's hand gently. Show me? Mary's movements were hesitant at first, and blossomed into something beautiful and raw. Jennifer watched, her throat tight with emotion. She no longer saw just echoes of her own lost daughter in Mary's face. She saw a unique spirit finding its way back to joy. This child wasn't a replacement for what she'd lost, but perhaps they could heal together. Back at the estate, Jennifer carefully pinned another of Mary's drawings to her study wall. The room had transformed over the weeks. Delicate sketches of dancers, birds, and dreams now covered the space where financial reports once hung. Each picture was a window into Mary's soul, fragile hopes captured in pencil strokes. She draws just like her mother did, Maggie observed from the doorway, a tray of tea balanced in her weathered hands. The housekeeper had been unusually quiet lately, disappearing into the attic for hours with old boxes and albums. Jennifer had noticed, but hadn't questioned, her loyal employee's mission. That afternoon, Maggie knocked softly on Jennifer's door, arms filled with faded photographs, yellowed letters, and a small wooden box. I think you should see these, she said, spreading the items across the desk. I knew Mary's mother when we were girls. She kept everything. Jennifer's fingers trembled as she lifted a photograph. Herself, much younger, standing beside a handsome man with Mary's eyes. A faded blue ribbon tied a bundle of letters addressed in her own handwriting. Thomas loved you, Maggie said quietly. These were never returned because he never received them. Anna made sure of that. Jennifer unfolded one letter, recognizing her passionate declarations from 15 years ago. I didn't know he had a daughter. I didn't know he'd married. He married Mary's mother after you left. When she died, Anna stepped in quickly. She found your letters in his things and hid them away. She knew who you were the moment you arrived in Maplewood. The revelations settled between them like a stone dropping into still water. All these years, Anna Smith had guarded her position by burying the truth that Jennifer and Mary's father had once been in love, their story interrupted by misunderstandings and Anna's careful manipulation. Does Mary know? Jennifer asked, her voice barely audible. Maggie shook her head. Not yet, but perhaps it's time she did. The clatter of tools against the wooden floor echoed through the small workshop as Robert Brown clutched his chest and collapsed beside his workbench. The half-finished shoes, Jennifer's special commission, tumbled from his gnarled hands. His breathing came in ragged gasps, his face contorted with pain. Word spread through Maplewood like wildfire. Mary Johnson was sweeping the chapel steps when she heard the whispers. Without hesitation, she dropped her broom and ran, her bare feet slapping against the cobblestones despite the autumn chill. Let me through, the child insisted, when she reached the gathered crowd outside the cobbler's shop. Her small frame pushed between concerned villagers until she reached Robert's side. The elderly man lay on a makeshift cot, his complexion ashen. I'm staying, Mary announced when someone suggested she leave. She pulled up a stool and took the artisan's weathered hand in hers. His fingers, stained with decades of leather dye and polish, trembled slightly in her grasp. Through the night and into the next day, she remained vigilant. When the doctor left with instructions for rest, Mary reached for one of the old storybooks that lined Robert's shelves. Her voice, soft yet determined, filled the workshop as she read tales of faraway kingdoms and brave heroes. My eyes aren't what they used to be, Robert confessed during a quiet moment, his voice barely audible. Haven't been since the accident. Mary looked up from the page. What accident? The cobbler sighed, his cloudy eyes fixed on memories only he could see. It was years ago, when Jennifer Davis first came to our village. A workshop mishap. Flying metal. My own carelessness. He paused. She's been trying to make amends ever since, though it was never her fault. As Robert regained his strength over the following days, Mary became his hands. She learned to thread needles, to hold leather just so, to make precise stitches under his patient guidance. Together, they worked on the special shoes Jennifer had commissioned. "These aren't ordinary shoes," Robert explained as they attached the delicate soles. "Each stitch carries intention, protection, courage, joy." Mary nodded, understanding more than her years might suggest. "Like wishes," she whispered. "Exactly like wishes," the cobbler agreed. When they finally completed the project, Robert ran his fingers over their creation. Though his vision had dimmed to shadows and light, his touch revealed the perfection they'd achieved together. The shoes were beautiful, sturdy yet delicate, practical yet somehow magical. "My final masterpiece," he murmured, satisfaction warming his voice. "And I couldn't have done it without you." What neither mentioned, but both understood, was that these shoes were meant for Mary, a gift from Jennifer, crafted with love by Robert, and finished by Mary's own hands. A circle of care, completed in leather and thread. Autumn leaves painted maplewood gold, scattering across cobblestone paths like nature's confetti. Mary Johnson watched them dance in the wind as she approached Jennifer Davis's estate, not sneaking through the garden gate this time, but walking proudly up the main drive. The invitation had arrived formally, handwritten on cream stationery, asking her to spend Sunday afternoon at the grand house. "You look beautiful," Jennifer said as she opened the door herself rather than having Maggie do it. She gestured to Mary's clean dress, one of her old ones, carefully mended, and the silk scarf, now fashioned as a headband to hold back her curls. Inside, the estate felt different in daylight. Sunbeams illuminated corners Mary had never seen during their secret dawn meetings. Jennifer had arranged Mary's drawings in simple frames along the hallway, treating each childish sketch like precious artwork. "I thought you might like to see them properly displayed," Jennifer explained, her voice catching slightly. "They remind me of someone I lost." Over tea served in the garden room, Mary learned about Jennifer's daughter, a girl who had loved ballet too, before illness took her away. The wealthy woman's eyes glistened as she shared stories, and Mary found herself reaching across the table to place her small hand over Jennifer's. "I think she would have liked you," the millionaire whispered. They spent hours together, Jennifer teaching Mary to play the piano in the corner of the sitting room, Maggie joining them with freshly baked cookies and stories about Mary's mother from their childhood. For the first time since her father had married Anna Smith, Mary felt the warmth of belonging. But in the village, Anna's resentment festered. She'd noticed the changes, the villagers' shifting glances, the whispered conversations that stopped when she approached. Her stepdaughter's growing confidence threatened everything she'd built. The confrontation came 3 days later in the churchyard. Anna intercepted Jennifer as she left the weekly service, her face twisted with barely contained fury. "You have no right," Anna hissed, keeping her voice low enough that the departing congregation wouldn't hear. "No right to interfere with my family. You're turning the village against me with your money and influence." Jennifer stood tall, her elegant coat catching the autumn breeze. "I'm not turning anyone against you, Anna. Your actions are doing that quite effectively. You're destroying my reputation, my standing here." Anna's voice rose slightly, drawing curious glances. Jennifer's response came with quiet conviction. "This is not about appearances. It's about the truth." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to ensure only Anna could hear. "And the truth is, Mary deserves better than bare feet and locked doors." As Jennifer walked away, Anna stood frozen, watching her stepdaughter laugh with Robert Brown across the churchyard, wearing a pair of simple but beautiful shoes no one had seen before. The morning of the harvest festival dawned bright and crisp, painting Maplewood in autumn gold. Mary Johnson stood at the edge of the village square, watching as neighbors hung garlands and arranged tables laden with pies and cider. Her heart pounded against her ribs, not from fear, but from a wild, unfamiliar hope. "Are you certain about this?" Jennifer Davis asked softly, adjusting the ribbon in Mary's carefully brushed hair. The wealthy woman's eyes held concern, but also pride. "More certain than I've ever been," Mary replied, her gaze fixed on the wooden platform where musicians were tuning their instruments. The square filled quickly as villagers gathered for the annual celebration. Maggie Johnson arrived with a basket of fresh bread, winking encouragingly at the girl. Even Robert Brown had been helped to a seat of honor, his weathered hands resting on his cane, milky eyes turned toward the sound of Mary's voice. When the music began, Mary stepped forward. She had deliberately left her feet bare, feeling the cool wooden boards beneath her toes. This was her choice now, not a punishment, but freedom. The first notes floated through the air, and she began to move. Her dance was nothing like the practiced routines of trained performers. It was raw, honest, filled with all the emotion she'd kept locked inside for years. Each turn was for her mother, each leap for the hope Jennifer had rekindled in her heart. The village watched, transfixed, as the small girl who had been invisible for so long commanded their attention with nothing but movement and courage. In the third row, Anna Smith stood rigid, her fingers clutching her purse until her knuckles whitened. The stepmother's carefully constructed narrative was dissolving before her eyes. For years, she had painted Mary as troublesome, ungrateful, difficult, but the child dancing before them radiated only grace and resilience. "She dances just like her mother," whispered an elderly woman nearby, loud enough for Anna to hear. When the music swelled to its final notes, Mary completed a perfect, heartfelt twirl. For one breathless moment, the square was utterly silent. Then, like a dam breaking, applause erupted, hesitant at first, then thunderous. People rose to their feet, some wiping tears, others smiling in wonder. Jennifer rushed forward, wrapping a shawl around Mary's shoulders. The girl's face glowed with something that had been missing for too long: joy. Anna remained frozen, her expression carved from stone. She watched as villagers surrounded Mary with congratulations and gentle touches. The stepmother's power was slipping away with each smile directed at her stepdaughter. The carefully woven web of lies was unraveling thread by thread, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The morning after the harvest festival, Maplewood buzzed with whispers. Mary Johnson sat on the edge of Jennifer Davis's sofa, her fingers tracing the pattern of the upholstery as Maggie Johnson placed a steaming mug of cocoa before her. The housekeeper's usually cheerful face was set with determination. "It's time everyone knows what Anna has done," Maggie announced, producing a worn leather folder from her apron pocket. Inside lay dozens of letters, faded, creased, but unmistakably in Jennifer's handwriting, all addressed to Mary's father. "I found these when cleaning the attic last month," she explained. "Anna intercepted every single one. She never wanted you to know that Jennifer and your father had remained friends all these years." The village council gathered that afternoon in the small town hall. Mary watched as Maggie stood before them, her voice steady as she revealed Anna Smith's years of deception. Not just the hidden letters, but the belongings sold under false pretenses, the money hoarded, the deliberate isolation of a child from anyone who might show her kindness. "She even told the school Mary was troubled," Maggie continued, "to explain away the bruises on her arms when she'd been locked in the cellar overnight." Gasps rippled through the room. Mrs. Fletcher, who ran the village bakery, covered her mouth in horror. Mr. Patterson, the postmaster, shook his head in disbelief. These were people who had known Mary since birth, yet had accepted Anna's carefully constructed narrative without question. Anna sat rigid in her chair, her lips pressed into a thin line. "You have no proof," she hissed, but her words fell flat as Robert Brown shuffled forward, his nearly blind eyes somehow finding Mary in the crowd. "I have receipts," the cobbler said quietly. for every item she sold claiming to be charity, items that belonged to Mary's mother. Jennifer stepped forward then, her elegant posture commanding attention. "I've filed for temporary guardianship," she announced. "Mary deserves a home where she is valued, not punished for existing." The process wasn't simple. Social workers came and went. Forms were filled out in triplicate. Mary's life was dissected in interviews and evaluations. The village, once so quick to look away, now watched with collective guilt as the truth unfolded. Anna found herself increasingly isolated. Neighbors who once nodded politely now crossed the street to avoid her. The invitations to tea stopped coming. The church committee quietly asked her to step down. Through it all, Mary found herself breathing easier. Each night, she slept in Jennifer's guest room, surrounded by her own drawings that Jennifer had carefully framed and hung. Each morning, she woke to Maggie's cheerful humming and the scent of breakfast. "Is this real?" she asked Jennifer one evening as they sat in the garden. Jennifer squeezed her hand. "Yes," she promised. "And it's just the beginning." For the first time since her father had died, Mary felt the unfamiliar weight of hope settling in her chest, solid, warm, and growing stronger every day. The village gathered at Robert Brown's workshop, the old building filled with the scent of polished leather and anticipation. Robert stood by his workbench, his gnarled hands trembling slightly as he held a simple wooden box. His eyes, clouded with cataracts that had nearly stolen his sight completely, searched the room until Maggie Johnson gently guided Mary forward. "I've made thousands of shoes in my lifetime," Robert said, his voice carrying the weight of decades. "But these, my dear, might be my last and finest work." Mary Johnson approached cautiously, her heart pounding against her ribs. The elderly cobbler carefully opened the box, revealing a pair of ballet shoes unlike any she had ever seen. The leather was supple yet sturdy, with delicate stitching that told stories along the edges. Tiny flowers, like those from the garden where she and Jennifer spent mornings, were etched into the soles. "Every step you take in these will be a step toward who you're meant to become," the cobbler whispered, his fingers brushing the shoes one last time before relinquishing them. Jennifer Davis stood nearby, her elegant posture softened by emotion. She had commissioned the shoes months ago, long before she knew how deeply Mary would touch her life. Now, watching the child's face illuminate with wonder, the wealthy woman felt something heal inside her own wounded heart. Mary lifted the shoes reverently, examining the craftsmanship that represented Robert's final masterpiece. They weren't just footwear. They were vessels of possibility, crafted to carry her beyond the shadows of Anna's cruelty and into a future where she could dance without fear. "Try them on," Maggie encouraged, her eyes bright with unshed tears. As Mary slipped her feet into the shoes, a perfect fit, she felt the first tear slide down her cheek, then another, and another. But these weren't tears of sadness or fear. They were acknowledgments of all she had found after years of loss. The shoes hugged her feet like they had been waiting for her all along. Jennifer knelt beside her, wrapping warm arms around Mary's thin shoulders. "Sometimes," she said softly, "love arrives in the smallest packages." Maggie dabbed at her eyes with her apron, smiling through her tears as Mary took her first tentative steps. The child moved with growing confidence, each step more certain than the last. "I never thought," Mary began, her voice catching. "I know, dear," Robert said, somehow seeing her clearly despite his failing vision. "But that's the magic of it. The things we never thought possible often become the most beautiful parts of our story." Mary understood then that love sometimes arrives in small, persistent miracles. A pair of shoes, a gentle embrace, a second chance at belonging. Anna Smith sat alone in her empty kitchen, the house echoing with absence. The neighbors no longer called, and the invitations to community gatherings had stopped arriving weeks ago. Her carefully constructed facade had crumbled like the walls of a sandcastle at high tide. Disgraced and isolated, she traced the rim of her cracked teacup with one finger. The same cup from which she'd sipped while issuing harsh commands to Mary. "No one ever gave me anything soft," she whispered to the silent room, her voice brittle. The words hung in the air, a confession with no witness. Anna's own childhood had been marked by similar cruelties, though she'd buried those memories beneath layers of bitterness and control. Now, with her influence shattered, the stepmother found herself facing the cold reality she'd created. Her world, once so meticulously managed, felt colder than winter's first frost. The village of Maplewood had turned its collective back on her. Even those who had once nodded approvingly at her strict methods now crossed the street to avoid conversation. The truth had a way of reshaping perceptions, and Anna discovered that isolation was the price of her deception. Meanwhile, across the village, Mary Johnson took tentative steps into her new life. Jennifer Davis walked beside her, their shadows stretching long across the path to the old chapel. The wealthy woman had become more than a guardian. She had become the mother figure the child had longed for since losing her own. "Are you sure you want to dance here again?" Jennifer asked, her hand resting gently on Mary's shoulder. The girl nodded, determination shining in her eyes. "This is where I found myself when I was lost," she explained. "I need to dance here one more time, but differently now." Inside the chapel, dust motes swirled in beams of colored light filtering through stained glass. Mary removed the shoes Robert Brown had crafted for her, placing them carefully beside the altar. Barefoot by choice this time, she began to move. Her dance was no longer a desperate plea, but a celebration. Each turn and leap cast her shadow across ancient walls, transforming the space that had once sheltered her grief into a sanctuary of joy. Jennifer watched, tears streaming silently down her cheeks, as the child twirled through patches of ruby and sapphire light. Mary's heart felt lighter than it had in years, unburdened enough to believe she deserved every step, every moment of happiness. The chapel, once her hiding place, had become her stage and her soul. Once so carefully guarded, now danced freely in the light. Spring painted Maplewood in vibrant hues as winter's grip finally released. The village seemed to exhale collectively, trees bursting with fresh leaves and flower beds erupting in colorful displays. For Mary Johnson, this season felt different, a true rebirth, rather than just another cycle of nature. In Jennifer Davis's garden, Mary knelt beside her guardian, hands deep in rich soil as they planted tulip bulbs along the stone pathway. Jennifer showed her how to space them properly, her elegant fingers demonstrating with practiced care. "Each one will bloom differently," Jennifer explained, tucking a stray curl behind Mary's ear. "Just like people." Mary nodded, understanding the deeper meaning. The flowers they planted weren't just decorations. They were promises that what came before didn't have to determine what grew next. The child's eyes sparkled with newfound confidence as she pressed another bulb into the earth. Maggie Johnson watched from the kitchen window, her heart full as she prepared lemonade for the gardeners. The housekeeper had transformed from silent observer to Mary's most vocal champion. In village meetings and quiet conversations with neighbors, Maggie shared the truth about Anna's deception with unwavering certainty. "That child deserves every happiness," she often declared, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much injustice go unchallenged. Her laughter, once rare in the estate, now echoed through hallways as she taught Mary old songs her mother had loved. Across the village, Robert Brown's workshop hummed with renewed purpose. Though his eyesight continued to fade, his hands remained steady. The elderly cobbler had begun training an apprentice, a quiet teenager from the next town who showed remarkable talent with leather and thread. "Watch how Mary walks in those shoes," Robert instructed the young apprentice one afternoon. "That's how you know you've made something worthwhile." The cobbler's greatest pride wasn't in the craftsmanship of the footwear he created, but in the confidence they gave to those who wore them. In Mary, he'd found the perfect embodiment of his life's philosophy, that the right shoes could help someone walk into a better story. Jennifer often brought Mary to visit the workshop, where the child would describe new drawings to Robert in vivid detail. His weathered face would light up with each description, his imagination filling in what his eyes could no longer see. As spring deepened, the village itself seemed to heal alongside its residents. Gardens flourished, conversations flowed more freely, and the weight of secrets kept too long began to lift from Maplewood's collective shoulders. For Mary, each day brought new reasons to believe that tomorrow might be even better than today. The village square bustled with excitement as preparations for the summer festival transformed Maplewood. Mary Johnson stood at the edge, watching the colorful banners unfurl in the gentle breeze. Her new shoes, Robert's final masterpiece, caught the sunlight, the leather supple and strong beneath her feet. She wiggled her toes, still marveling at how something so beautiful could belong to her. "Are you ready?" Jennifer Davis appeared beside her, elegant as always in her simple linen dress. The millionaire's hand rested lightly on Mary's shoulder, a touch that had become familiar and comforting over the past months. "I think so," the girl replied, her confidence growing with each passing day. Across the square, Maggie Johnson directed a group of volunteers, her authoritative voice carrying over the cheerful chaos. The housekeeper caught Mary's eye and winked, pride evident in her smile. Since becoming Mary's fiercest advocate, Maggie had blossomed into a community leader, organizing events that brought the village together in ways no one had imagined possible. Mary no longer needed her old, worn ballet flats or the letter she'd once kept hidden inside them. Those remnants of her past remained in a keepsake box in her new bedroom at Jennifer's estate, treasured but no longer essential. She carried her memories in every step now, in every dance, in the way she held her head high when walking through the village. Robert Brown sat nearby on a bench crafted specially for him, his weathered hands resting on a walking stick. Though his sight had nearly gone, his smile was brighter than ever as he listened to the sounds of celebration. His legacy lived on not just in the shoes he'd created, but in the confidence he'd helped build in a once barefoot child. The village had changed too. The whispers that followed Mary were different now, admiring rather than pitying. Even Anna Smith had found a measure of peace, teaching piano to children in the next town over, slowly learning that control and love were not the same thing. "It all began with those words," Jennifer murmured, her eyes distant with memory. "Please don't take my shoes." Such a small request that changed everything. Mary nodded, remembering the frost beneath her feet that morning, the desperation in her voice. "And you heard me when no one else would." The woman who had once been driven solely by grief now smiled with genuine joy. Together they had rebuilt their broken pieces into something stronger. The millionaire and the barefoot girl had proven that sometimes the smallest voice could indeed change the world, if only someone took the time to listen. Mary squeezed Jennifer's hand and stepped forward into the square, ready to dance her story for everyone to see.